The fallout from the Jeffrey Epstein file release was on President Trump's mind over Christmas. He used one of his dozens of holiday posts to wish, quote, "Merry Christmas to all, including the many sleazebags who loved Epstein." It comes as the Justice Department now says it has uncovered more than 1 million additional documents potentially related to the case, and that it may need a few more weeks to review and release them to the public. Under the law signed by President Trump in November.
I need to tell you about the latest development in the Epstein files debacle, and it's so absurd that it would be funny if it wasn't such a slap in the face to survivors and the American people. On Christmas Eve, the Justice Department suddenly announced that they've discovered more than 1 million additional documents potentially related to the Epstein case, and they're going to need a few more weeks to review and release them. 1 million documents.
All the DOJ Epstein documents were supposed to be released last Friday. Joining me now is Nick Ackerman. He was an assistant special Watergate prosecutor and a former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. All right, so these Epstein files, they go back decades, right?
Correct.
How can something like this happen where the DOJ on Christmas Eve, mind you, suddenly says, hey, we're now become aware of more than 1 million more files potentially related to Epstein, that it's going to take us weeks now to send out to the public?
Total nonsense. They had to know that these files existed right from the get-go. First of all, we know that prior to May of this year, Pam Bondi had lots of FBI agents going through all of these files to determine whether President Trump's name was in these documents. So she knew where the documents were. But on top of that, even more glaring is the fact
that they just found on Christmas Eve, after missing the legal deadline by almost a week. Let me be crystal clear about what this is. Total nonsense. This is a lie. This is the Justice Department treating the American people like idiots and hoping we'll just accept that somehow, magically, on Christmas Eve, they stumbled across 1 million documents they had no idea existed.
That all of these documents they had to know were in the Southern District of New York that prosecuted the Maxwell and Epstein criminal cases.
Why is that?
Because when you're a prosecutor, you are obliged, you're commanded to return over to the defense exculpatory evidence under a Supreme Court decision known as Brady. And in order to do that, you have to get every file that's in the federal government, whether it's in the FAA or some other agency. They have to be under your control so you can comply with your Brady obligations. And certainly Todd Blanche, who was in charge of this whole matter, was a former assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. He should have known that. So they had to know that these were there. There's no excuse for it.
Nick Ackerman, former assistant Watergate prosecutor and former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, laid out exactly why this is impossible. First, we know that prior to May of this year, Pam Bondi had FBI agents going through all of these files specifically to determine whether Trump's name appeared in them. So she knew where the documents were. She knew they existed. The whole reason they were reviewing files early was to figure out how much damage control they'd need to do around Trump's connections to Epstein. They weren't surprised by these documents. They were planning how to hide or spin them. But even more damning is the fact that all of these documents had to be in the Southern District of New York's possession, because that's the office that prosecuted both the Maxwell and Epstein criminal cases. And here's why that matters legally. When you're a prosecutor, you have what's called Brady obligations. That's based on a Supreme Court decision that requires prosecutors to turn over exculpatory evidence to the defense, meaning anything that could help prove the defendant's innocence or undermine the prosecution's case. By the way, I am trying to do my best to gather all the information I can for you and share it with you. Please leave your likes and comments, and I would be grateful if you subscribed. Let's continue. To comply with Brady, prosecutors have to get every file that's anywhere in the federal government that could potentially relate to their case. Whether it's in the FBI, the FAA, or any other agency, they have to be under the prosecutor's control so they can review everything and determine what needs to be disclosed to the defense. The Southern District of New York had to have gathered all of these Epstein-related documents to prosecute Maxwell. They couldn't have met their Brady obligations otherwise, and Todd Blanche, who's in charge of this whole document release process as Deputy Attorney General, was a former assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. He should absolutely know this. He knows how Brady works. He knows that SDNY had to have compiled all of these files. There is no excuse for pretending they just discovered 1 million documents on Christmas Eve. They knew these documents were there from the beginning. The claim that they need weeks to review them is equally absurd. Ackerman pointed out that redacting victim names is simple. You just put a black mark over the names of people who are identified as victims. That's it. There's nothing in these files that legitimately relates to national security. There's no other really valid reason not to release this information. They've had more than a month since the law passed. They knew where all the documents were, and they claim to have had 1,000 lawyers working on this. This should have taken no time at all. But what this is really doing is destroying whatever remaining public trust existed in the Justice Department. Ackerman said it plainly. Public trust is completely dissolved. There is no public trust in DOJ anymore, whether it's appearing in court before judges or telling the public what they have or don't have. Pam Bondi has zero credibility at this point, and the process they've used for releasing documents has been equally chaotic and suspicious. Multiple times, the DOJ put documents out, then rescinded them, claiming there were issues requiring more redactions. Then they put out hugely redacted versions where you literally couldn't see anything, just pages and pages of black ink. That's not how normal redactions work. Even with Freedom of Information Act requests or redacted reports like the Mueller report, you get redactions of specific bits and pieces, but enough remains visible that you can understand the context and substance. Here, they're blacking out entire pages on documents that go back to 2010 or earlier. There's no legitimate reason for that level of secrecy about decade-old information. These documents should have been ready to release the moment the law passed. They had a month's notice and discussion about this legislation for months before it actually passed. There's no excuse for any of this. Now, some people are trying to give the Justice Department the benefit of the doubt. Former federal prosecutor Elise Adams suggested this might be more of a diligence issue than a cover-up. She pointed out that the searches have expanded from narrow searches related to specific cases against Epstein to searches for every possible mention of Epstein anywhere in federal records. So the volume of documents doesn't necessarily surprise her. But even Adams acknowledged this is a diligence problem. The Justice Department knew this legislation was coming. It would have made sense to get everyone ready early, to reach out to various agencies and start compiling documents before the law even passed. The fact that they're now claiming to need more weeks to comply when the deadline was December 19th indicates they haven't been as diligent as they should be, and they need to work around the clock to satisfy their legal obligations. What makes this even worse is how survivors have been treated throughout this entire process. Multiple survivors and their attorneys have expressed frustration that despite Todd Blanche claiming this is all about transparency and protecting victims, survivors weren't notified about these releases, weren't consulted, and don't feel like they've been considered at all. Some victims had their names accidentally exposed in early releases because the redaction process was so sloppy. The people who suffered actual harm from Epstein's crimes are being treated as an afterthought, while the Justice Department focuses on politically managing releases to benefit Trump. The DOJ has apparently been asking for volunteers, former prosecutors, and law people to work over the holiday to try to speed up review of these million newly discovered documents. Think about what that reveals. If you truly had 1,000 lawyers working on this since March as you claimed, if you knew where all the documents were, if you'd been properly preparing, you wouldn't need emergency volunteers working over Christmas to catch up. This is crisis management by people who either completely failed at planning or who are deliberately dragging this out to avoid compliance. And as one commentator pointed out, this feeds directly into conspiracy theories and public distrust. Republicans were the ones who started pushing for these files to be released, arguing there was important information being hidden that the public deserved to see. Trump himself signed the law, but now his Justice Department is making the entire process look like a cover-up through their incompetence and delays and selective releases. That undermines legitimate transparency efforts and makes it harder for people to trust anything that eventually does come out. Eugene Robinson made an important point that there's actually enough time and attention to focus on both the DOJ's misconduct and Epstein's crimes. We're talking about victims who feel violated and disrespected by their own government. Some of them cooperated with investigations, hoping and believing that justice would be served. The ongoing concern that the Justice Department is more focused on working for Trump instead of the American people is not being addressed at all. If anything, it's being confirmed with each passing day. Concerns about transparency, honesty, and dependability are being questioned even on the right now. Even people who wanted to support Trump and believed he would handle things properly are starting to see that's not what's happening. When you miss a legal deadline, then announce on Christmas Eve that you just found 1 million more documents, then ask for volunteers to work over the holiday to catch up, that's not what competent administration looks like. That's what a cover-up looks like when it's falling apart. Trump himself revealed what's on his mind with one of his Christmas posts. Merry Christmas to all, including the many sleazebags who loved Epstein. Think about what that message tells you. He's not focused on justice for victims. He's not concerned about rooting out everyone who participated in these crimes. He's thinking about the sleazebags who loved Epstein, which presumably includes people in his own social circle. People he partied with, people whose names are in these files. That's where his head is at during Christmas: damage control and political positioning around Epstein. The bottom line is this: the Justice Department didn't just discover 1 million documents on Christmas Eve. They knew these documents existed. They knew where they were. They had access to them for months or years. The claim that they need more weeks to review them is a stalling tactic designed to push this past the holidays, past the initial wave of public attention, into a time when people might be less focused on demanding accountability. This is what obstruction of justice looks like. Ro Khanna was exactly right when he called it that. Congress passed a law with bipartisan support. Trump signed it. The law required all documents be released by December 19th in a searchable format. It's now more than a week past that deadline. Instead of compliance, we're getting excuses, delays, claims of newly discovered documents, and requests for more time. That's why the inherent contempt charges against Pam Bondi matter so much. The 30-day grace period Khanna and Massey are offering is already more generous than the law requires. Bondi should be facing consequences right now for missing the December 19th deadline, but they're giving her one more chance to actually comply. And if she doesn't, if these delays and excuses continue, then the fines need to start, the contempt findings need to be issued, and Congress needs to use every tool at its disposal to force compliance. Because if we accept this, if we let Christmas Eve announcements of millions of newly discovered documents become the new normal, if we allow legal deadlines to be treated as suggestions that can be ignored with flimsy excuses, then we've established that laws simply don't apply when you're protecting powerful people. And that's not a country anyone should want to live in, regardless of their political affiliation or feelings about any specific party or candidate. The survivors deserve better. The American people deserve better. And the rule of law demands better. 1 million documents that suddenly appeared on Christmas Eve. Give me a break. This is a cover-up, plain and simple, and everyone involved should be held accountable for defying a law that the president himself signed. That's the story, and no amount of holiday timing or bureaucratic excuses can change it.